especially with Microsoft products, right? I mean, again, it's just like the naming conventions for things are a little bit different than other products, right? And it's like there's a lot of like there's so many moving parts to them where it's like, again, it's like their security stack is very sophisticated. It's just it takes a long time to learn, and obviously having that helper there. Like the other thing I found as well too that was actually really interesting about it is that I think particularly for like well for anybody in the organization, like oftentimes you're like afraid to ask like really simple questions. You're just like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
gonna get like blown up here. Whereas like you're not afraid to ask like obviously like an AI like this question about again, how's this product work? Should I know how to do this? Like, what exactly is this like, threat into threat, this threat group? It's like there's but I think like that's the other thing too, is there's like it does kind of like encourage people um to get over perhaps like maybe some shyness that they would have otherwise.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Future of Security Operations podcast. This week, I am delighted to be joined by Dane VandenBerg. Dane's 16-year security career includes product-focused roles with vendors like Qintel and more recently Microsoft, where he was the principal technical specialist supporting the development of their security copilot. He's also spent a lot of time in fintech, serving as VP of Information Security at Prime Trust and currently Senior Director of Security Operations at Circle. Dane, I am delighted to have you on the show.
Happy to be here.
Dane, we worked together for a long time, and you've got such an interesting background that, yeah, I'm been really looking forward to this. Really looking forward to this podcast. But you started your career completely outside of security, exploring topics like women's healthcare and animal cloning. Where did your interest in security come from?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting path that I took here for sure. When I first graduated from when I finished undergrad, I started working in public relations and I did that for about 4 years. And it was actually a great skill set. I think that when I look at what I learned during that phase, like there's so much that's kind of carried over into like the vendor world and just in my current role as well too. A lot of it, the PR company that I worked for was like they did a lot of well, it's kind of like a grab bag of issues, but it's based in DC, so a lot of it was like very kind of advocacy and politically focused. But again, it really specialized in technology related issues and everything from again like obviously pet cloning to again some of like the women's health issues where for instance like we advocated against like silicone breast implants, right? And there was a lot of science behind like why those silicone breast implants were like unhealthy for women. And so basically it's like you have to take a lot of kind of really kind of complex technical issues, which to be honest, I wasn't a scientist, obviously, but be able to kind of figure out like where the nuggets are and distill those down to an audience, which would be, journalists
Mhm.
and the public at large, and be able to kind of communicate those effectively. And to be honest, like I just feel like I've been pretty much like doing that throughout my entire career, like through security as well, too, where I think I've been enough of a generalist where it's like I kind of have like a fairly good grasp of, the kind of basic concepts. But I mean, if you told me to go build something tomorrow, like I probably couldn't like in our security stack. But that being said, like, once it's there, I know how to use it. I
Mhm.
understand the data really well, understand how to dig into things. Um, so kind of getting into how I actually transitioned into security, uh, yeah, I wasn't super happy doing public relations too. I mean, the job's like a little bit of a meat grinder, particularly as you're like, a bit more junior, where it's like a lot of like you're literally just a telemarketer to a certain extent. There's a certain point where you just like call up journalists and be like, hey, I got this story, this is great. Do you want to do like, write something on it?
Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, I wasn't super happy with my career at that point. So I went back to grad school and my intention actually is I wanted to go work in the oil and gas industry. I've always been fascinated like with geopolitics, and it's like oil and gas like kind of sits right at that
Mhm.
kind of fault line of like geopolitics and commerce. And so I was always just really interested in it. And so like I went to school and I was going to get like a security studies degree and do like a joint MBA. And so that was the plan. Is like I was actually in the MBA program at Carnegie Mellon University and security studies program at University of Pittsburgh. And it was like the first 2 weeks, I think, at the security studies program at University of Pittsburgh, there was actually a guy there that was working for an organization called the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, which was based out of Pittsburgh. And he was always talking about like cybercrime and blah, blah, blah. And it's just one of those things where, to be honest, like I knew about like obviously malware. I mean, I've read the news, but I didn't really know all that much about it. And yeah, it sounded like really interesting. And when I got to Pittsburgh, actually, I'd just broken up with my girlfriend that I had for about like 7 years. I didn't know anybody there. And I was just like really like lonely and just had a lot of time on my hands as well too. And so I talked to him. I was like, "Hey, do you have like any internships there or anything like that?" And he's like, "Yeah, we have like a guy who's leaving, and so we're looking for somebody to go fill his seat." And I was like, "I really don't know a whole lot, in general about like cybersecurity, and just like don't worry about it. It's like you can kind of go pick it up on the job." And so I was able to get in there like super early when it first started. And for people who aren't familiar with like the NCFTA, I mean, it basically served as like this fusion center where there was actually the FBI was co-located there, the Postal Inspection Service, and then you had a lot of like, kind of intern analysts
Hmm.
that worked there that were mainly kind of college students that just kind of did give just general research, and they were actually funded by partners in the private sector. And so we actually had like, Facebook was in there and like, Google was coming through and stuff like that. And so it was really interesting because, once I got in there, it's like I realized like pretty quickly that I was like, wow, there's like a real career here. And this was early. This was like back in like 2000, was it 2005 or 2006, I think.
Hmm.
Um, and so there wasn't like a cybersecurity, again, I think like, iDefense was like the main vendor that was out there. And so you saw that there was just like so much possibility in this space. And that's why I was like, all right, I'm doing this, and drop the MBA program and just gonna focus like 100% on doing like cybersecurity.
Wow, very brave. And yeah, I didn't realize it was a broken heart that got you into cybersecurity. Um, so yeah, the NCFTA was obviously enormous back then, but you spent a couple of years there, and then you moved into the vendor space. I think you worked in kind of customer success for two, yeah, boutique, but like relatively large at the time, like threat intel firms, iSight and Qintel. Can you tell me a little bit about, I suppose, what you were doing and what the cyber landscape looked like at that stage?
Yeah, well, for one, I was never just strictly customer success. I mean, I always was like doing the work. And so like, generally
Okay, yeah.
speaking, it's like everything that I stood behind, it's like I was doing like a lot of like the research behind it, like as well too.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I would say like the threat landscape at the time, it's funny because I was like I left the industry for like a couple of years actually after eyesight, well actually about a year and a half, and I was like really afraid like coming back in like everything was going to be like brand new. But when I kind of like look back at it, like to be honest, like a lot of stuff like hasn't really changed all that much, right? It's like there's
Mhm.
still like, nowadays like phishing's still a huge concern, and it's like it was a big concern back then. And it's like when we kind of look at like on ramps into like, our environment, like phishing still like again it's like a very kind of top of mind concern obviously that people have. And I think like, again, there was when I was there too, it's just, and I think worked in the vendor space as well as like, it's also like very, um, again, you kind of become a bit of an expert in terms of like around like who your clients are. And so I was like working like in the West Coast. And so again, I sat on site like at eBay, which is where I met you. I was sitting on site like at Facebook and some other
Mhm.
places. And so like again, I got to become a little bit more familiar, I think, with like the problems like in those particular sectors. And it's funny because I think it's the same thing where it's like you just don't see. I think like again, it's like there's still like ATO problems. It's like I think like when you kind of look at like the landscape, it's just basically like the flavors have kind of changed a little bit in terms of how credentials are being stolen. I mean, obviously now it's like, kind of cookie stealers and stuff like that. So it's like a little bit more like exotic with like session tokens being like hijacked with through browser stealers. But at the end of the day, it's like it's still kind of like the same central problem that like most organizations face. Um, so I know that's like kind of a very like kind of general way of like framing it, but again, to be honest, like it is like, and again, it's like I think that's kind of partially why it made it easy to kind of like transition or easier to transition into like an in-house role from the vendor space as well too. It's just because I've just seen so many patterns like, kind of over and over again for like compromises. Like we were helping out whenever there was like breaches. You were kind of brought in to do kind of like an external perspective of like, was the threat actor landscape look like? Um, but again, it's like it's just you just kind of develop like a lot of these patterns. And to be honest, it's like you see a lot of repetition like throughout like really the last like decade or 15 years.
Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Yeah, it's ATO for anybody that's when account takeover specifically of like accounts in the I suppose of yeah companies and organizations that have a whole lot of like business B2C style customers. But yeah, you definitely helped us a ton in eBay and a ton in DocuSign, and like your expertise and certainly the firm's expertise was like understanding of the exact nature of the threats that were facing eBay, facing DocuSign, facing Google and Facebook and your other customers. I suppose like coming from it's not unusual for people to move from industry to, or from the vendor space to industry, or industry to vendor space, but it is a little bit unusual for kind of that threat intel move. And how has, I suppose, your understanding of the landscape, I suppose, affected your decisions when you're now in, like, I suppose, both product facing or now in, I suppose, in industry and, a security operations role in Circle?
I mean, I think it's like definitely been interesting to go from like a threat intel role to like much more of a SecOps focused role. I mean, both at Prime Trust and here at Circle, again, I've basically been responsible for DNR teams, like insider threat as well
Hmm.
to like beyond, and threat intel has always been part of that portfolio and product security. Um, I mean, again, it kind of goes back to where it's like, kind of with public relations, how it's like a very kind of well-rounded discipline. It's like, I feel like with threat intelligence as well, too, is like, it's also like a very well-rounded discipline as well, too, that you kind of come in and, um, again, it kind of goes back to like, again, I've seen so many kind of patterns emerge in terms of like how companies have been attacked. And I think like at Qintel especially, again, we were very fortunate because like we were brought in for a number of different like breach investigations involved like nation state attackers and involved like e-crime actors that were just like, just credential mishaps of like, somebody getting a hold of credentials and going to like popping somebody's like AWS account and just grabbing the S3 bucket because they could. Um, these types of things that again, it's like I think that again, it's like I came in like with a fairly like strong background and at least like understanding what the on-ramps look like. um, I would say like the biggest thing I think that I wasn't prepared for is that by the time like people generally come to us in the vendor space, like generally speaking, it's like again, like our customers would already have like a decent handle of the problem, right? There's probably still like a lot of like, unknowns that they came to us for. But generally speaking, it's like they had an idea of at least like how they were probably compromised. And they actually, they kind of there was actually already like a signal out there that something bad had already happened. And I
Hmm.
think like kind of coming to the in-house role, that was the one thing that I wasn't totally prepared for is that, you have like all of these like weak signals of like badness, like that you see all the time. You're just like, do I need to care about this? And I think like that's the hardest part for me from the transition was just like that. Do I need to care about this? I kind of burned out my team initially because I was like, guys, we need to like go like all in
Yeah.
and like investigate this. And really like it probably didn't require that level of diligence, you know?
Yeah, but it's really hard to, it's incredibly hard to prioritize, especially when like ironic, like when you have a little bit of a lack of visibility, uh or a lack of depth and visibility, but you can see certain things and it's really hard to investigate them. That's when it's very scary. Where you're like, yep, just something's pinging a bad IP address. I don't know anything more than that. Um it can be yeah, it can be very difficult to yeah, to investigate and to track down and, yeah, be able to tell that signal from that noise. I want to just pick up on something you said. I think you said like threat intel is like a well understood discipline or something along those lines. Um,
Well-rounded, yeah.
well rounded. How do you think most in-house security teams are using threat intel or approaching threat intel? Do you think it's like effective? Do you think it's useful, or do you think it's I'll throw out like a slightly controversial opinion. When I like talk to some threat intel teams, they're doing incredibly well. Others, I feel like they're, yeah, chasing down rabbit holes for not a huge amount of value.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's like I think also too because like most organizations don't exactly know what to do with it either. It's like sometimes you have I think there's some organizations where the threat intel teams like function really well and you have like senior leadership especially understands the value of it and they kind of have a vision for it. I think the problem is that what I've seen for like the threat intel shops that are not so great is they basically just turn into, essentially like the daily news inside of the company. They're just basically like report writing. And again, it's like, these reports are generally like not very, consumable. They kind of focus a little bit too much on, kind of more general threat intel, just stuff
Here's
that's
what
going
you
to
need to
happen
be
in the kind of
aware of.
periphery. Yeah. Um, Whereas again, it's like I think this is the one thing that the two times, well, for both like Prime Trust and here at Circle, like threat intel is like fallen inside of more or less the security operations organization. And so when I kind of came in, it's like I really looked at threat intelligence, especially as like again, I came out of the vendor space, and threat intel like needs to be like an in-house vendor, like in my opinion. And so basically, it's like you need to kind of go figure out like who you can service like inside the organization, like what they need, and oftentimes it's just like it's data, right? I mean, again, it's like I think there's like a need for like reporting here and there, and it's like it's helpful to have like presentations. But I think like really it's like kind of the core function of threat intel when it actually does operate really well is like it enables like DNR, right? Like again, it's like our threat intelligence function at Circle. for most of our kind of like new alerting that's kind of more novel that the DNR team tackles, um, like most of that detection writing, like it comes out of like threat intelligence like research. And so again, it's like having threat intelligence lead like threat hunts as well too, and kind of come up with like PCs for like red teaming exercises and things like that, I think are super important. But then it's like you find there's like kind of other consumers like inside the organization as well too, that again, we're a crypto company. And so again, people are concerned about like bad blockchain addresses and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And so again, that kind of becomes like a mandate as well too, is like, okay, how can we start collecting like bad blockchain addresses and make those consumable to people like inside the organization? And so again, it's like I think a lot of it is just like, once you kind of like I think that uh, it's kind of like once you kind of develop like an identity for your team, in terms of like again, it's like what they're supposed to, what they're supposed to do. Beyond just again, just simply like writing reports. But again, it's like, you're like an enabler, right? It's like you're like a vendor, it's like you're a service organization inside the company. Go find clients and like let's just figure out how to like get the information they need in like a kind of repeatable, consumable fashion that they can, generally speaking, like automate, obviously, like inside of organizations. And I feel like that kind of helps make the function a little bit more clear in terms of what the expectations are. And sorry, the last thing I'll say as well too is that I've also kind of dealt with like fairly small like threat intel teams as well too that I've had to
Mhm.
manage. It's pretty much been like one person operations. Um, and so again, it's like you also have to. This just makes it impossible to turn it into like a report writing apparatus as well too. I mean, you have to be like really smart in terms of how you use those resources and how I use like my threat intelligence like manager's time. Um, and so just because of like my background as well too, I'm able to kind of hop in and like help out as well too. Like if we do need to do report writing and stuff like that, I'll kind of roll my sleeves up from time to time and help with like kind of getting some stuff together. But that being said, it's like as I said, it's like with kind of smaller shops, it's like you have to be a lot more tactical in terms of how you use that.
I don't want to dive too deep into the cryptocurrency, yeah, or anything like proprietary or anything like that. But like, it, obviously, the criminal ecosystem started using well, Liberty Reserve and then Bitcoin and then like a whole lot of other stuff, like back in the day. But like, was that like threat intel side of it part of the reason that you wanted to join Prime Trust and now Circle, or was it like what was the desire to move into I suppose those like finance cryptocurrency style companies?
Yeah, I mean, I've always when I first started my career, actually, like the very first like kind of big project I guess I had at NCFTA was actually as a project called like Stockade, and we were looking at we were helping brokerage firms basically tackle a very specific like account takeover problem they were having that came out of like the Russian space. And so basically, what would happen is you'd have particularly actually one Russian actor that had like an organization that he was running, but they'd basically go like take over your Fidelity account, liquidate your assets in there, then go buy some penny stock to basically go like pump it up, right? And so it's basically these like kind of ATO enabled pump and dump schemes. And so during that time, I was able to actually bring together. I think the first uh kind of sponsor I guess we had like at NCFTA was Fidelity, and so they actually sponsored me as an analyst. And then we were actually able to bring in like every single online brokerage firm within like a year, just because like this problem was like so acute and nobody was like really had a solution. Nobody was tackling it in the vendor space. And so we created this like information sharing initiative of basically it's like how do we kind of share like targeted ticker symbols, because generally speaking it's like there's like organized campaigns around this. There's kind of a few more wheels that were inside of it as well too, that kind of started out with like just your typical spam and stuff like that try to pump them. But then as I said, it's like there's also the ATO enablement as well. And so I've always been like really interested in the financial sector like in general, and particularly with like trading. Again, it's like I've like I just kind of personally, it's like I like to trade stocks, and again I got into cryptocurrency like fairly early as well too.
Mhm.
um and so yeah, I think I was like always like interested in it. And obviously it's also kind of yeah, it's something that was not very well established either. I think like that's the thing that's like really kind of throughout my career, I've always been like really excited about kind of doing like newer things and like kind of again, it's like if I had to kind of step into a role and like everything's kind of already established, like that'd be like fairly boring for me. It's like I really, again, it's like I like to see um I like to have an impact, right? It's like I basically like to go into an organization within a couple of years, like just see my fingerprints on things, right? Where it's like, okay, this is something that I did, whether it's like good or bad. But Um, so again, it's like I think like crypto like really kind of had that opportunity where again like when I kind of came in, it was still like not very well established. I mean, it's getting like more so at this point, but like again, when I went to Prime Trust, I think it was there's a lot of opportunity to start kind of figuring out how to start tackling some of the problems that are kind of specific to the crypto community, at least on the outside. When you kind of get inside of the organization, it's like you kind of realize oftentimes like SecOps roles, there's like, probably maybe 20% of it is like some wrinkles that are kind of specific to the crypto industry. But at the end of
Yeah.
the day, it's like SecOps is SecOps. And I could be doing this job at like Coca-Cola to a certain extent as well, too, or like elsewhere. But yeah, that being said, it's like I think it's a really kind of a fascinating industry from that perspective, where again, it's something that again that we're still kind of like figuring out how to deal with. And obviously from the particular regulatory landscape, it's like still evolving daily. So
Yeah, completely. I guess like, is there any, and I know you're saying like totally true, 80% of the job is like both run the business and the normal stuff that everybody that comes on this podcast will be talking about. But is there like anything in that nature of, with a, yeah, with a digital currency or a stable coin, like the impact of an incident is potentially enormous. How do you go about and prioritize and measure the risk of like a, yeah, the risk of a cyber attack in those circumstances?
yeah, well, I mean, internally, like, and we sit actually inside the risk management organization, and
Hmm.
so this has been great. Like here at Circle, is like I've really, um, I think I've learned a lot about at least just kind of how to manage like risk internally and communicate risk. Um, and it's just this a little bit of a mindset. It's just funny since I've like worked here at Circle. I have a son now who's going to be 2 years old in March, and it was really interesting because like it actually kind of framed like how I raised him as well too. It's like I would kind of see, so when he first started like walking, for instance, right, like he's like kind of like very unstable, and you're always afraid he's gonna like fall into a table or something like that. um but again, it's like it's funny because I noticed like once I started like watching him try to walk, I started thinking about this from a risk perspective, where it's like, okay, he's like walking, he's on carpet, like that's fine. There's not a table nearby, we're good. Whereas like I noticed like my wife was like a lot more like she just didn't want to fall, period. I'm just like, okay, it's okay if he falls here. Like he's not gonna break anything. He's not gonna get a bruise. He's gonna be fine because there's nothing around. And then it's like again, kind of once you start seeing like tables being introduced, or he starts walking on the concrete floor or going outside or these things, again, it's like that's where it's like you start kind of like calculating risk a little bit more. And it's one of those things that, to be honest, I think like a lot of us we just do on a day-to-day basis. There's just not really like a discipline around it. And it's just like it kind of made me more conscientious of it, just simply because we've been going through these risk exercises like at Circle. And I think um again, if you kind of think about it like inside of like a risk organization, or inside of like an organization like Circle, I mean, yeah, like you said, it is like kind of it's definitely like humbling, like when you think of again like what a loss could look like, just because it's like there's like Ryan McGee and like Magoo like used to kind of keep up this like blockchain graveyard, and it's like a project on GitHub. And man, when you go through there, it's just like, I mean, this is an industry where it's like you can just lose like $500 million, and it's like really no big deal. This is kind of like the cost of doing business. And I mean, can you imagine like at eBay, like losing $500 million? I mean, people like lose their minds.
Yeah.
And so there's these like just these massive losses that people in the industry take, and it is like, um, it, and again, I think it's like being both at like Prime Trust and Circle, they were both like very sober organizations in this
Hmm.
space. I think like particularly here at Circle, it's like you have a lot of people that came out of traditional FIs, and so they definitely like they process risk a lot more maturely, in my opinion. I think just in terms of like obviously like how assets are being stored, how they're being monitored. um Again, it's like we kind of put ourselves in a position where it's like I don't think that we could probably take like kind of catastrophic losses like you'd see like again for some of the kind of like younger upstarts like in this space as well too. And then kind of how that kind of filters down to like the DNR role. Again, you are looking at, it's like I'm always looking at like what were these big events that had happened, what are all the breaches in this space, and it's like how are those risks like translated to us. And so again, I think obviously with like North Korea is like the most kind of the biggest example, right? Where it's like, it's they've just been like the kind of alpha predators in this space to a certain extent. And again, it's like it's really kind of like tracking their movements and like what they're doing, and it's just like kind of doing our best to kind of mitigate that risk that's like kind of coming from some of these like known entities that are out there. Um, and so, and how we've kind of been developing that is you start to kind of decompose that like inside the organization, just for like the basic DNR function. A lot of it is just like, kind of developing these like, kind of risk appetite metrics around just like simple things like logging and detections. And,
Mhm.
even just like with a threat intelligence program, again, it's like, how responsive is it? And so I think like that's one of those things where it's like we've kind of been able to take, kind of big problems and kind of break those down a little bit from, kind of high level.
One of the things you talked about in the past is, I suppose, the importance of creating like a sensory network within an organization to allow people to report their own security concerns. Um, can you talk a little bit about how you've approached that, or how somebody who's listening in could approach that to, help, I suppose, help, build a stronger proactive security culture?
Yeah, and this gets a lot into like the vendor space, I think, where it's just basically like being a good communicator, I think is the most important thing. Like as a security organization, it's obviously incumbent upon us to make sure that, again, we're communicating out threats to the organization and people understand it, like beyond just simply, your annual security training that people, click through as fast as possible. Um, and the thing is like, it's kind of goes back to just like making it personal, right? It's like I want to
Hmm.
make sure that, again, when we're doing security bulletins. So again, we try to do like PSAs, like, fairly regularly through Slack, not enough where it's like just fatigue where people just stop reading it, but um putting out PSAs that are relevant to the organization. And it's just like, not just like, hey, this bad thing is happening, but it's like, hey, this bad thing is happening. This is how it translates to Circle, and this is how it might manifest here. So, here's what to look for. And so I think it's like partially that, but it's also partially just building relationships with people in general. And I think like with like different kind of pieces of the organization where it's like people just know that they can come to you, and it's not like, it's very kind of blameless, right? I think that's like the number one thing is that there's like, particularly if you kind of clicked on something or whatever else, there's like a certain degree of like, shame that's like involved with
Yeah.
that. Um, but again, it's like how can we kind of be like as like non-judgmental as possible? And I think, again, we try to kind of convey that just through our day-to-day interactions with people where it's like, it tends to be like really positive. um Even just like, kind of running like a SOC function as well too. Just simply, again, there's opportunities for you to actually go like reach out to people when you see something suspicious is happening like on a machine or whatever. And it's like, as long as you make that interaction like really positive. And I think like that's the one thing where it's like I've tried to kind of, really kind of drive home. We need to kind of have like a very customer service like kind of mindset.
Hmm.
um, and I think it's really easy to lose sight of like inside of organizations. You see it all over the place where it's like you don't treat internal customers the same way as you treat external customers. And that's just natural. But I think it's like the more that you can kind of see yourself as a service organization, we talk about threat intel being that, but also, just the DNR function as well, too, to a certain extent, is like a service organization. And, the better good interactions, like the more good interactions you can have with people, I think the more likely people are to kind of come to you and trust you with issues that they're seeing.
Yeah, I could not agree more, and it's still sad to see some security teams be I suppose, the team of no. But even if it's not the team of no, even if it's like filled with the best intentions, there's still the way of communicating of like, we've shut this down because it was too risky. Like, just be a little bit more generous in your communication, share, invite them along in the process, bring them in on the journey. Because if you don't, they're even if you're communicating, you're gonna alienate people and they're gonna feel frustrated. You talked a little bit there about, I suppose, the importance of communication as a security vendor. When I think about the best examples of customer service and the best relationships I ever had with security vendor, I think about you, and I think about, I suppose, our relationship at iSight and Qintel. And yeah, in many ways, the customer success team and here at Tynes is like based off just how well you treated your customers. How did you go about learning that? And I suppose, what do you think is key to a world-class customer experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. To be honest, like it's nothing that's intentional. Like I wouldn't say like I read any books about this or, gave it like a lot of thought. I think a lot of it really just kind of came down to just, I mean, I cared about like every single one of our clients. And it's just like you guys were all friends of mine, right? And so it's like I think like that's just at the end of the day, it's like, it's kind of like your success was like our success. And it's like I just wanted to make sure that um yeah, just like everybody had like the best experience possible. It's like for me, I guess it's just like a lot of it is like it, and again, it's like I kind of really benefit from like being in a small organization like Qintel where, again, it's like I was basically, in certain senses, I'd like, kind of go make the breakfast and serve the breakfast and take the order. And it's like, you kind of like were able to kind of have like your hands in a lot of different kind of parts of the process, which I think was like really helpful. Because it's like, I mean, that way it's like I knew it's like, generally speaking, it's like, I could go do the work. I knew it was excellent, but also I had to go look in the whites of your eyes when I went to go deliver that work as well, too. And so um like it does like it does it kind of goes back to like, again, when you're actually like directly interacting with a customer, like it really kind of changes like um the quality of work, I think, in terms of like what you're doing. It's obviously it's not scalable, right? That isn't possible to
Mhm.
do as you get to. But what I try to do though, like more than anything, is like I try to bring like as I started to kind of get a little bit more divorced from the actual hands-on work, I try to bring like, analysts on calls like as much as possible and just get people as much exposure to customers because I want them to have that relationship too. And also, just feel that pressure, right? I mean, I think like that's the thing is that's the number one thing is that, man, I always just felt like, I was just on the line if I got a question from a customer and I had to figure out an answer for it. Like it might not be the answer you're looking for, but it's like I needed to get something because I couldn't tell you no because you asked that question to me directly. And it's like I feel like that's the thing where it's like as you get like more abstracted away from that end user, it's easier to say no. And I think like that's the one thing that, it's like I really, really try to kind of like reinforce in the organization is like, again, just like knows like, not acceptable. Like if you need to go talk to a customer directly.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, we're not like we've great relationships with the whole lot of customers, obviously, but um ensuring, yeah, like ensuring the product team and ensuring the engineering team have visibility into like all those customer requests and just how impactful they are when they're fulfilling them, or just how damaging it is if, yeah, God forbid, have a bad incident or something like that. We really try to set like that culture, but one of the ways we do is like we like on every single meeting, we say, hey, like Times is powering the world's most important workflows, so that our engineering and product team know that, hey, if something went wrong, it's like, well, you've broken our customers and like the world's most important workflows that we're just trying to emphasize at every opportunity. Like, hey, our customers trust us, and you can't lose that trust, and you have to be able to, as you say, like look in the whites of your customers' eyes, because that's what my team's going to be doing. But it's yeah, I just yeah, I definitely think of you when I think about that. What you've got some incredible companies on your resume. Are there any vendors out there right now, or any security companies out there right now that you think are doing a great job, or companies that you wish you could or could have worked with?
I mean, times. No, candidly, like really, it's like you guys are for sure. And again, I'm not obviously saying this because I'm on your podcast, but no, it's like really, I think like a lot of like what you all have like put together and how you've like built a company has been really remarkable. Uh, and again, it's really interesting how I kind of see it proliferate like inside of the organization as well too. Like again, I can just say that oftentimes when people get exposed to times inside the company, they're like, oh, can we get some more stories for this? And so again, it's like I think like overall, it's like you all have created a product that again, I think like people understand the value of like very quickly, and I think like it's just so hard to kind of to do that quite often. So as I say, I think like that's just like obviously, again, this is like a really easy answer, but this is like, for sure like Times is definitely like well up there on the list. The vendors I'm actually most interested in do tend to be kind of like some type of commodity data provider. So it's like whenever you're able
Interesting.
to go, well, to me, it's like I think those are like by far the best bang for the buck that you're going to get, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like, kind of going back to that, like, is this, I've got a weak signal here, and how can I like
Hmm.
tune the fidelity of it? Generally speaking, it's like, there's two ways of doing it. You can either go like dig into it and spend a lot of time looking into it, or odds are there's probably some type of enrichment solution out there that's going to kind of help you like zero in on at least like kind of either like kind of like raise or lower the fidelity of that signal. And maybe it's like you can just like altogether just ignore it. And I think like if you kind of look at like again companies out there like like Spur and like IP info kind of in the IP intelligence space. And that's like
Yeah.
where kind of we're going into a little bit with Qintel, but it's again, like those were so important. And then I think even just like I've really been digging into like the extension space a little bit as well too for like Chrome extensions, for instance. And there's like extensions total is like another company out there that kind of provides like a paid service that again obviously operates like very much like virus total, but again it's just there's like one of those niches that um just nobody's like really built like great solutions around. And I think like those are the things that are kind of like really interesting for me is that again it's like if you kind of look at like Google Workspace, I mean it's kind of terrifying. It's like I think oftentimes like people don't quite like people are still kind of like wrapping their heads around like the power of the browser. And again, it's basically like it's a desktop.
Mhm.
And so, again, it's like how do you start controlling that environment better? And it's just when you kind of look at the information that actually like Google gives you, like, in the extent for extensions, it's still like not great, right? You still need like another click of information. It's like it's kind of going out and like looking for those sources which are able to go like kind of give you like a bit more like fidelity into like new extensions that are being introduced in the environment and things like that. So yeah, I guess I would say it's like kind of going back to like in terms of like hot new sim products or things like that, like again, it's like that doesn't excite me as much as like again just finding like really great like information sources that just didn't exist or that maybe didn't exist before I wasn't aware of or things like that.
That's a really good answer. Yeah, and that the browser space is definitely hotting up. I'm going to give a quick shout out to I don't know if you know John Tuckner. He was a Tynes guy, and he's just set up his own yeah browser extension. Threat intel company Secure Annex, definitely worth
Oh,
checking out.
actually,
Very similar to extension total as well.
I'm going to be contacting them after this podcast.
100%. Well, give my referral code.
Tell Thomas, yeah.
Um,
Times 2020. Um,
I yeah, I want to I want to touch a tiny bit on that product space because you spent a couple of years as a like chief product officer at Qintel, and then obviously you spent a little bit of time in as you spent a little bit of time in Microsoft on the product side of the house as well. Um, in Microsoft, you were, and I don't want to dive too much into this, but in Microsoft, you were spending time as supporting their security copilot. Without going too deep, is it like is security copilots like a fad? Are they going to be where it goes? Is it all going to be like a completely agentic vision? You've obviously got a little bit more experience than the vast majority of people. What do you like? Where's it going?
yeah, that's a it's a great question. Yeah, when I was at Microsoft working on the Copilot team, it was really interesting because I was there like very early. So when we were still
Hmm.
doing the we were still basically letting some of our customers like pilot it before like it went to GA. And the feedback from customers was just it was all over the map. There was like literally we had like one customer who was like, we were going to go get an MSSP, and now that we have this, we don't need this MSSP any longer. Where there's others which are just like, meh. And so like what I kind of find is like it's basically one of those tools that yeah, if you kind of understand how to use it and you have like a use case that works well for it, like obviously you're gonna love it. And if you don't, you don't. And it's like I think that we're still obviously like in like super early innings for it. And in terms of like how exactly the Copilot product itself is going to develop, yeah, I don't really know because the biggest thing that Microsoft had going for it was that it obviously had a huge library of like threat intelligence data as well too from
Hmm.
like MDTI that it was like kind of being fed into it. And so again, it was basically using like a RAG model, retrieval augmented generation. I think that's what A stands for. Where again it was basically would call out there, and again like they would help like it would kind of answer like your prompts like through their kind of vast like library of data. And so that was like really awesome that you actually had like kind of security specific data around the answers that the AI would give, or the LLM would give. But that being said, it's like I'm kind of been using ChatGPT like a lot more like over the last year, obviously, and asking it very specific security questions as well too. And I think especially with some of the later generations, which are getting like kind of real time information. Because when I was there, it's like we still weren't getting real time information from ChatGPT,
Yeah.
which made that threat intel reporting so much more important. Because again, it's like you were getting at that point kind of real time information from the Copilot product. Whereas like now it's like I find actually ChatGPT is like just kind of prompting it for like kind of security related questions around like TI and things like that. It's like it actually does like a really good job with answering them. And like again, just an example, like just over the holiday, again, I was like kind of tackling this extension problem and digging into it like a little bit more. And so I would just fed it like, about all the extensions we have in the environment and what the manifests are and like the permissions that it has. And it was just like, kind of asking it like, kind of how would I go like, surface like obviously like kind of risky combinations of um permissions and again just fed it the whole list and had it like kind of spit out like which ones I need to be concerned about. And to be honest, like it did a pretty good job. I mean, I think we're still in this like it's a intern phase where it's like it's like a okay intern is kind of like how
Yeah.
I would frame like a lot of like how I'm seeing like ChatGPT, but we're starting to kind of like deploy like AI like in our ticketing system as well too, like around DNR, where we're using like again some of the in-house like AI capabilities that Tines has like that's native to the product. But then we also have like other tools as well too, where we do have like kind of LLMs that are being trained on like our Jira data, like our
Hmm.
GitHub data as well too. And so again, when kind of tickets are popping up around like this thing happening, like in this particular AWS account or this Kubernetes container, again we can basically go like prompt the AI and like go find like a ticket hopefully that kind of corresponds to whatever suspicious activity there is, and obviously go through and like enrich like the Jira ticket that gets created for the SOC analysts. So yeah, I would say it's like overall it's like just in terms of the kind of like security copilot itself, it's like again it's like I think it's gonna be something that's gonna have like legs. It's gonna get obviously like appended to like a lot of the products that Microsoft has. Super helpful for doing like kind of writing like KQL queries and stuff like that. So I think massive helper application if you're in the or in the Microsoft ecosystem. But if you're not in the Microsoft ecosystem, I'm not really sure how helpful that's going to be.
It makes a lot of
Beyond or
sense.
yeah, yeah.
It's like what there's I think there's tons of potential in copilots in general, but like one of the things that it's just amazing at is like domain specific knowledge that's hard for like a human being to understand, or hard for a human being to like to parse and learn and like remember. It's so easy to say, hey, write a SQL query, write a KQL query, write a I don't know, yeah, pull this information back using this particular tool. It's really, really easy to do that in a way that human beings just struggle to remember every single piece of syntax. So it's
Well,
great.
especially yeah, and especially with Microsoft products, right? I mean, again, it's just like the naming conventions for things are a little bit different than other products, right? And it's like there's a lot of like there's so many moving parts to them where it's like again, it's like their security stack is very sophisticated. It's just it takes a long time to learn, and obviously having that helper there. Like the other thing I found as well too that was actually really interesting about it is that I think particularly for like well for anybody in the organization, like oftentimes you're like afraid to ask like really simple questions. You're just like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
gonna get like blown up here. Whereas like you're not afraid to ask like obviously like an AI like this question about again how's this product work? Should I know how to do this? Like what exactly is this like threat into threat this threat group? It's like there's but I think like that's the other thing too is there's like it does kind of like encourage people to um get over perhaps like maybe some shyness that they would have otherwise.
100%. Yeah, like I have no idea what this guard duty rule means, even though I recognize all the words in this in the alert. Just explain it to me like I'm five. Oh, here it is. Oh yeah, actually that does make tons of sense. I did know about that. It's yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah, really incredible about that. We're almost out of time, but I've got a last question, which is like, I ask this a lot, which is around like, hey, what does security look like in 5 years' time? You're kind of at the cold front of a lot of North Korean attackers and a whole load of others. Uh, I'll ask it a slightly different way. What do you think like attacks are going to look like in 5 years' time?
Yeah. Um, well, again, it's like I do think it's interesting, like because we were just talking about how like 15 years ago it's like
Yeah,
again phishing was still an issue and ATO was an issue, but you're starting to see all that stuff is changing, right? Like, I do think it's like we're kind of in the middle of like this very seismic shift, particularly in the credential space, where again, obviously like kind of passkeys are becoming more popular, and again, just the whole concept of needing like a username and password for an application is like is pretty much like going by the wayside. So to be honest, like like, what that exactly means, like in terms of like how, because I mean, again, it's just this is obviously it's like a never ending again it's based like a never ending like game, right? It's like I think sometimes like you find like from like a defender standpoint like like again if you look at malware for instance, right? Like again the malware space is almost like totally dried up to a certain extent, right? There's obviously like browser stealers and things like that, but it's nowhere near as bad as what it was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Even yeah, 8, 10 years ago, it's a hell of a lot better.
yeah, exactly. So you're kind of seeing those problems like get cleaned up, and it's like I feel like right now. So it's like again, it's like I think that was like one of those things where the defenders kind of had this advantage in the malware space, and then it moved in the browser. And then it's like, okay, this became like a new problem that we've kind of had to deal with. And again, this has been a pretty persistent problem. And again, it's like I think the interesting part about that too is again, it kind of going back to like it was able to go, it was stealing like session tokens, right? And so from there, it
Hmm.
kind of like circumvented like the need to actually go steal like actual like kind of email pass credentials as well too. And if you had like an Okta token in there, it's like you were or an Okta issued token, you were bypass Okta as well, or you can. So um, I still think it's going to be that. That's why I do think again, if you kind of look at the I think probably that session token space is going to become probably like a little bit more important for attackers.
Hmm.
Just because again, it's like that's still going to be because again, you're still going to try to find ways to obviously like authenticate in the platforms. And I just think it's like that's just the name of the game, right? And it's just we're never going to get around it. At least I don't think in the not too distant future. So we're starting to kind of excise like the credential threat from it. But it's like I do think that token threat is going to be one of those things, and we'll probably be talking about like 5 years from now as well too, and probably it's going to be like even more important for attackers. Um, but again, it's like I think with same things like social engineering, like those types of things, it's like at the end of the day, it's like the more that you actually need like kind of human intervention to do things, the more important it's obviously going to be to the more important it's going to be to go like social engineer people and. The means of doing that with like AI and things like that are just they're going to be so much better too. It's like I just think it's like if you kind of look at voice printed people and be able to go spoof like voices and video and stuff like that. I think like that's going to be a pretty big problem as well too. Like as we kind of evolve. So
Yep, interesting. Yeah, loads to think about. Dane, unfortunately, that's all we're gonna have time for today. If people want to follow your journey, though, what's the best way to do it?
they can follow my LinkedIn is probably the best way of doing it. Which is there's actually two Dane VandenBergs like in the tech space. I'm the Dane VandenBerg in Las Vegas. There's actually another one. I thought that was only Dane VandenBerg in the world actually until I was actually going through the LinkedIn breach data. That's how I discovered there's another Dane VandenBerg out there. Um, So yeah, I'm Dane VandenBerg at Circle. And I don't really post a lot on there. I have a lot of ideas in my head. I probably should do it more. But yeah, that'd be it. And then just bump into me. I try to show up at conferences. I live in Las Vegas, so I try to pop into security conferences when I can. It's a good spot for that. So
Awesome. Well, look, Dane, it was great catching up. Thanks so much for joining me, and yeah, looking forward to catching you and bumping into you at one of the conferences later on this year.
thanks for the invitation. Really appreciate it.